Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Kay, and I'm joined by producer Chris Judge of the class of 2005. Here on the Providence College Podcast, we bring you interesting stories from the Fryer family. This week, we're talking with Dr. Marcy Zipke, professor of elementary and special education. Dr. Zipke teaches language and literacy courses at PC, and Teachers College Press of Columbia University has just published her latest book, Playing with Language, Improving Elementary Reading Through Metalinguistic Awareness. The book is full of great suggestions for teachers and family members to help children build skills for learning, as well as how to tell jokes that will elicit laughs from kids at every grade level. Dr. Zipke, thanks for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
Would you please explain the term metalinguistic awareness for those who are unfamiliar with the term?
Sure. Being meta about anything is being aware of the thing itself. So I think metacognitive is probably a term most people are familiar with, where you think about your own thinking. Right, but so metalinguistic awareness is explicit knowledge of and conscious manipulation of language. So most of the time that we are speaking or using language in writing or in any way, we're not really paying attention to the structures and the sounds of the language. We're just trying to convey meaning however we can. But when you think about language as a tool, then you start thinking about the smaller parts, like the individual sounds or the meanings of the parts of the words, which is called a morpheme. Or the syntax of it, so being able to think about what you're doing and consciously manipulate that is what metalinguistic awareness is. So, I mean, for example, we all know lots of multi-meaning words like rock or watch or ball, right? They all have multiple meanings, but we don't necessarily think about all of those meanings when we're talking about one particular meaning of it. But if you call them homonyms and you choose terms purposely because they're more or less ambiguous and you want to get your point across really well, then you're using that metalinguistic skill in the service of being more comprehensible. So one of my favorite ways of talking about and teaching metalinguistic awareness is through jokes and riddles. And you don't even necessarily have to find the joke funny to be metalinguistic about it. So everybody knows, the youngest kids know what a riddle or a joke is, and they laugh uproariously at riddles and jokes, but they don't necessarily get it, right? So they will retell jokes incorrectly, and then they'll laugh and laugh and laugh. But that's just because they understand the purpose of a joke. They understand the format. To really understand the language in it, sometimes you can tell when a kid figures it out. So something like, why didn't the skeleton cross the road? Because he didn't have the guts. Right. It revolves around the idea that guts can be either bravery or it can be, the stuff that's inside our bodies. But for a little kid, they'll think it's hilarious. The idea of a skeleton in the road is hilarious, right? So any answer will do. Why didn't a skeleton cross the road? Because he didn't want to. Ha 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 ha. But when they really get to that level of linguistic understanding, when they can manipulate the language, then they'll start to do things like rub their stomach when they're telling the joke, because they understand that your guts is inside your body, as well as being bravery. And they might not necessarily tell it correctly. Still, it's not until they really get to the point where they can retell the joke correctly and or explain it to you that we know that they've got the metalinguistic awareness down. But that's the idea.
How does that help children learn to read? What are some of the challenges that you hope this book will help you address?
Yeah, I'm totally fine with you saying people, because it's everybody, right? When we read, basically there are two. So the simple view of reading, as developed by Goff and Tunmer years ago, like 1985, is that reading is composed of decoding and language comprehension. Those are the two things that you need to do to be able to read. You have to read the words on the page, and you have to understand the language behind it. And sometimes there are factors that make it a little more complicated, but without one or the other, without being able to decode it all or without understanding the language, you don't have any possibility of reading. And so metalinguistic awareness really speaks to both. So for example, phonemes are the smallest unit of sound in a word. So cat is made up of 3 phonemes, k, a, and t. And phonemic awareness is a big deal. It's been a big deal for a while now in preschool, kindergarten instruction. And most teachers, I think, are on board now and are doing regular phonemic awareness practice. But the point of it, the idea of manipulating phonemes and words, is that kids have to get familiar with comfortable with saying, okay, cat is k-a-t. If you take the k off of cat, you get at. If you add a b sound, you get bat, right? And the reason that that helps you learn, helps you decode later is because when you're looking at the letters on the page, you're looking at that CAT, you have to be able to say, okay, k-a-t, and blend them together, k-a-t, cat, right? So manipulating the sounds orally really does help later when the kid is looking at the letters on the page and they're learning to decode. And that's just one example of metalinguistic awareness. So phonemic awareness is one example of metalinguistic awareness. And then other forms, so manipulating the sounds of the language, the parts of the language, the structures of the language, all of it is under that bigger umbrella term of metalinguistic awareness. So to talk to the language comprehension part of the equation, things like syntactic awareness, right? Like really understanding sentences that can be understood in multiple ways. They're not grammatically incorrect, but they can be understood in multiple ways. Like the chicken was ready to eat, right? It could be that you're walking into a KFC and there's chicken that's ready for you to eat. Or it could be that you're on a farm and you're about to throw down some grain for your chickens who are hungry, right? And there's no way to know. It's not grammatically incorrect. It's syntactically correct, but it's ambiguous. So understanding that it's ambiguous as you're reading it and that you're going to need more context to add to your comprehension is super important. And that sort of thing is really about the language part. So decoding and comprehension and everything we learn about language can help with both parts of that equation. But I'm not even advocating, this is not a whole reading curriculum. It's more about, being aware that especially children, as they're developing their language, are playing with words and sounds and they're trying to figure it out. And so teachers should be modeling a curiosity about language, right? You don't have to know everything about the language. But for example, I was observing a student teacher once who was teaching, they were doing a writing lesson and one of the students was writing about leopards. So he asked the student teacher how to spell leopard. And she kind of scrunched up her nose and said, "Oh, that is a really weird word. Let me just tell you how to spell it." Right? Because you can't sound it out. It was perfectly, she's right. Like there was no reason to ask him to sound it out. But meanwhile, I was sitting there doing nothing, right? I mean, I'm observing, but I wasn't part of the instruction. So I had the space to think to myself, why is it spelled Leopard? Let me go look that up, right? So I looked in the dictionary and leopard is actually made up of two morphemes, Leo for lion and pard for panther, which I found fascinating. And I think that 8-year-old would have found fascinating too, from a scientific perspective. And then also it probably would have helped him remember how to spell it in the future, right? And read it in the future. So that sort of thing is interesting. And you don't, like I said, you don't have to know it off the top of your head. You just have to be curious and say, let's go look in the dictionary. Let's figure it out, right? Or another good example is that I remember when I was a kid in 4th or 5th grade, having a horrible time remembering which one was horizontal and which one was vertical. And I wish somebody had told me that the word horizontal is related to the word horizon, right? Because the horizon is long and flat, and then it makes perfect sense. But just that there's a vowel shift in the middle of the word. When you say horizon, you hear a long I, right? Horizon. And when you say horizontal, just because of the additional syllable on the end, the vowel changes to a short I, so it's horizontal. And just that small twist meant that as a kid, I never put them together in my mind. It's not until I was an adult that I was like, oh, I could have remembered horizontal that way. So I want teachers to be aware that these sort of tricks maybe, will help kids, but that also just being curious and just being like, let's go figure out what we can about that word, right, will help kids to develop their metalinguistic awareness.
And so as opposed to having kind of a negative reaction or feeling about not knowing something, just being like, oh, I don't know that. Let's go figure it out. Let's play with it and see what we can.
I mean, in general, absolutely. I think teachers can model that kind of problem solving but also just it's not being negative about the language, but it's being curious about how we can manipulate it, right? Or how we could understand it.
So I have to say, when reading your book, I thought it provided an extremely valuable service because you analyze why some jokes and riddles work and what types of jokes kids of different ages will understand, as well as how they'll help them develop language skills. So you've already done this in some respects, but could you give us some more examples and break down?
Yeah, sure. So as language develops, it's not as much about age, although I can break it down by age for you. But it's about this child's language development. So in preschool and kindergarten, kids are mostly focusing on learning to decode. Most kids are focusing on learning to decode. And so, like I said, it's become a big deal that teachers teach phonemic awareness in preschool, kindergarten. And so riddles like, what's a duck's favorite snack? Graham crackers, right? Manipulates the sound in the word. So quackers instead of crackers. You've changed the kr to qua, right? Is appropriate for the kid that's playing with phonemes and sounds and is learning that. And then as they get a little bit older, although I'd say kindergartners do this too, they're working on words and their vocabulary development. And we learn new words all throughout our life, of course. But, you know, when you're learning about homonyms, especially, things like, why did the witch go to school? Because she wanted to spell better, right? Starts to make sense because spell has multiple meanings. It could be like casting a spell on somebody or spelling a word. And then for slightly older kids, I like riddles that revolve around the syntax, right? So like I said before about sentences or words that aren't technically incorrect, the grammar's not wrong, but the language is ambiguous. So what did the clerk say when the woman wanted to try on a dress in the window? Don't you want to use the dressing room? Right? It's not incorrect to ask to try on the dress in the window. Everybody knows you're not going to stand in the window to try it on, but you know, it can be intentionally misunderstood that way. But there are also, I mean, there are lots and lots of jokes and riddles that aren't linguistic at all, that aren't based on language. And for children that are still learning the form and the pragmatics of how to tell a joke and what to expect from conversational partners, I think that's a great place to start too. So, I mean, things like, why do bees hum? They don't know the words, right? It's not, there's no language manipulation in it. It's just intentionally silly, right? And so kids that tell riddles or jokes like that are absolutely learning about what a joke or a riddle is. And that some people won't find it funny, which is fine, right? It's not about the humor. It's about understanding the joke. So yeah, so those are a few. I mean, there are definitely some around morphemes about like a bluebird, right? A bluebird could be a sad bird. So why was a bird sad? Because he was a bluebird, right? Around understanding the blue can mean sad. Those are sort of harder. I like the phonemic versus language manipulation better, word or syntax manipulation better. But this is a task for teachers because there are no children's riddle books that are broken down by linguistic skill. So you have to pick up, or websites. I mean, you can search for lots of kids' jokes and riddles, but the adult involved is going to have to analyze them and figure out what the unit of manipulation is before presenting it to the kid.
I feel like this is probably a good segue to recognizing that this has been such a tough year for so many educators and families. And, you know, a lot of teachers are trying to figure out how to do things, you know, for our new hybrid / remote world, although some are going back to schools now, and lots of caregivers are in the role of educators unexpectedly, in addition to every other responsibility they also have. In addition to searching websites and analyzing how jokes break down, finding jokes that meet these categories, what are some activities that you would suggest for caregivers or educators that they could do in these sort of new environments that we're suddenly teaching our kids?
So there are lots of children's books that are based around language manipulation or that have humor in them that's based around language manipulation. There's an appendix in my book with a whole list of them, but probably the best known series is the Amelia Bedelia series, where she takes most things that are said to her literally. And, you know, so when she's asked to make a jelly roll, she pours jelly on the floor and pushes it along, or asked to draw the drapes, she gets out a pencil and paper, right? Or pitch the tent, she throws the tent away, you know, so things like that. So that the Amelia Bedelia series is old and a little bit sexist. Like, it hasn't necessarily aged well in terms of the stories, but the language manipulation definitely has. And there are some updated ones that I think the original author, Peggy Parrish's nephew or son or somebody has written that are a little bit more modern.
With like a little girl as
Yeah.
Amelia Bedelia is a little girl in that book, right?
Yeah. She's not a maid anymore. There might be people that remember the Hungry Thing or the Hunger Thing. There's like a monster. There's a series with monsters in it who intentionally, the Hungry Thing, Jan Slepian, intentionally converts phonemes in words. So he comes to town and he asks for schmancakes. And then there are kids who have to figure out what he's requesting. And so they say things like schmancakes. Sounds like fan cakes. Maybe it's pancakes, right? That's a whole series too. There are at least 3 of those. The Hungry Thing Returns. I forget what else. But so there are lots of books out there that you could be reading with your children and encouraging this kind of language play. Sometimes it's just about the teachable moment, like I was saying with the learning to spell leopard. I was at a restaurant the other day and I overheard a mom. I didn't hear the beginning of the conversation, but when I tuned in, she was saying to her kid, well, you know that pyro is an abbreviation for fire. She called it an abbreviation, but it's a morpheme, it's a part, right? She said, so yeah, you're right. Pyromaniac is a person who's crazy about fire, but also pyrotechnics, right? That's technical fire. That's like fireworks that we create, which I thought was very funny because, pyro is a funny example, but it's a great example of seizing the teachable moment and telling your kids about morphemes and words. Obviously playing word games like Scrabble, right, are good for kids. I actually like Words with Friends. I like the digital versions of Scrabble better for this purpose because kids can put in combinations of letters and then the app will tell you if it's a word or not, right? So you could try morphemes, you could try parts of words that in combinations, and then the app will tell you whether or not it's okay to play that term, which I actually think is really interesting for teaching purposes. For little kids, songs and games like, Marcy, Barcy, Banana, Fana, Farcy, right? Just going through all of your friends' names and manipulating the sounds in them, or playing I Spy with phoneme manipulation instead of colors, right? I think the original I Spy game was I spy something blue, and then the kid has to guess it's the sky. But if you say like, I spy something that starts with k, right? The kid has to look around and be like, cloud, cars, whatever else starts with k. And you can make it more and more difficult, actually. That I Spy one is pretty flexible because you could also do it with ending sounds, right? I spy something that ends with the sound d, d. Oh, it's the road, right? Or even middle phonemes, right? With the O sound in the middle would be road. So just thinking through like how you're talking to your kids sometimes is helpful. For more formal activities, my favorite thing to do is to write riddles with kids. They absolutely, by about the age 8, are capable of not only appreciating and retelling riddles, but they can write their own. So what I've done with groups of 8 and 9-year-olds in the past is to start with a topic that they choose, but I kind of steer them toward topics that I know well too, so that I can be familiar with what's going on. But we brainstorm a list of terms together first, and I make sure we write them all down so that they can look at them and they can, think systematically about the terms. But, for example, baseball was a popular one that I did with kids. And so there are lots of homonyms involved in baseball terms. So they will say right away, bat and ball, right? And both bat and ball have multiple meanings. So first you just make a list. So bat, ball, umpire, uniform, base, pitcher, catcher, whatever. And then I have them go back through the list and pick out the homonyms. Like, so which words could have multiple meanings? And let's make a little, lines to the word with, and write down both definitions. And they'll say, okay, ball, let's see. Ball can be the baseball that you're throwing, or it can be like a dance, like Cinderella, right? And bat, it could be the animal, or it could be a baseball bat. And then the challenge is to come up with questions that seem like they're going to be about one meaning, but then really reflect the other. And this is the part that the kids aren't great at usually, right? But if they understand the concept, then they can write sort of an awkward sounding question and you can help them edit it. And come up with things like, why are spiders good outfielders? Because they like to catch flies. Or where's the biggest diamond in the world? Fenway Stadium, or whatever baseball park is closest to you. Right, so diamonds could be multiple things, or flies, like fly balls, can be multiple things. And then they have ownership over it too, because they've created these riddles. And you can, make a little book or whatever for them to share with their families. And it's so baseball has worked well for me. Animals, there are lots of animals like spiders, web, mouse, whatever, that can have multiple meanings. Harry Potter works well for whatever reason. Just because the kids are familiar.
Harry Potter always just works well.
It just works well.
Yes, that's always the answer.
There are probably other topics as well. I've gotten used to it. I think for people that are new to this, you might want to have a topic in mind ahead of time and go Google and like cheat and come up with some riddles in your own mind first, and then you can help the kids better. But yeah, those three are good topics.
So you're basically suggesting that teachers schedule like an open mic session for their kids in class, and then they can, try out these jokes and and riddles. And I mean, knock jokes would work the same way, right? Knock jokes are that format, like come up with a phrase that is a pun or a play on "let me in" or "open the door" at some point. And
absolutely, I remember being 5-ish. And being obsessed with knock jokes. I don't remember much from that period of my life, but I remember absolutely like desperate to come up with my own knock joke and bothering my own family all the time with nonsensical knock jokes. Knock, who's there? Water bottle. Water bottle who? Like, that's my water bottle. It makes no sense. And then one day we were driving to my dance lesson and I saw a tennis facility on the side of the tennis facility. It said tennis in big letters. And it was such a moment of cognitive clarity that I remember it to this day, where I was like, oh, knock, who's there? Tennis. Tennis who? 10 is my favorite number. Yay. I saw the 10 in the middle of the word, in the beginning of the word. So yeah, so absolutely, knock jokes would be good. And yeah, I think that sounds fun to have an open mic session with your students over Zoom or whatever, like however it has to be done.
Family joke night. You could do that with extended family. That would work in a remote setting for sure. So this is not the only research you've been doing. You are also working on a COVID-19 research project on student teaching during the pandemic, thanks to a grant from the college's Office of Sponsored Research. Could you tell us more about that study?
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Lori Dunn and I are working together to investigate best practices for preparing our pre-service teachers during the pandemic. In education, we've had to pivot like everyone in terms of our own online instruction, but we've also got students out in the field in whatever capacity that means now. So in some of our methods classes, it's been one-on-one over Zoom. In some of our methods classes, the students have been able to get out into the classrooms this semester and teach a whole class. For our student teachers, it's meant really a blend of everything. Like they've been in person as much as possible, but they've had to do some remote instruction. They've had to do some high flex instruction where they have, some students in the room and some online. And I've been super impressed with the student teachers I've been supervising. I saw a lesson recently where the student teacher had 15 kids in the classroom. She had 4 on Zoom on one laptop. She was projecting for the students in the classroom on a second laptop. 3 of the kids that were remote who were on Zoom had the materials that the kids in the classroom didn't, but one of them did not. So that child she had set up a Seesaw activity. Seesaw is an online tool that can sometimes mimic what you're doing in the classroom. So she had set up a Seesaw lesson for that one student, and she was helping everybody through the lesson. And it's her special ed setting, so it's an inclusion room. So there were a number of students with special needs in the room that she was also adapting the instruction for, and it was just amazing to me. I mean, I also, and I have another one I saw recently was a remote lesson where the student teacher he was at home, the students were at home. He was managing behaviors in that he was kind of policing the chat while they were singing. It was first grade. They were singing and they were practicing songs in this phonics lesson. And I've been so blown away by how well they're handling things that I want to know how they learn them, right? Where do they get these skills, and what are the best practices that we can use for, helping teachers to succeed in this brave new world of ours? So yeah, so we've been interviewing a lot of people, talking to a lot of the pre-service teachers, and now we're moving on to talk to some of the cooperating teachers as well about what they think would be most useful in the future and what's working now.
Yeah. It would be great if we could say we would never need to use these techniques in the future, but if we can capture and learn some lessons from this terrible experience, all the better, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I do think that there will be some, and I think that there are some things that we're learning to do now that are useful even in person. So I found in my own classes, as I'm teaching online, having that chat as a back channel for students to type in questions that they don't want to ask, for whatever reason, they don't feel good about asking out loud, has been super helpful. And I'd like to find a way when we're back to in-person teaching to, do that, to mimic that somehow so that students have a way to feel comfortable asking their questions, without having to raise their hand and speak, if that's what they need. So yeah, I think there are a lot of things that we can learn, and things that have gone well during the pandemic. So trying to be positive, but also just trying to figure out what we need to carry over.
So I don't want to hesitate to ask, but how did you develop your interest in metalinguistic awareness? How did you get interested in this topic?
So I don't know exactly. I remember speaking with my dissertation advisor about riddles and my interest in, and that story that I just told about my own cognitive clarity as a 5-year-old and coming up with 10 is my favorite number. I think the hard part about doing research on language in young kids is that they can't always talk about their language, right? So you have to find ways to demonstrate understanding or to recognize understanding before they can tell you about it. So things like the child who's rubbing his stomach while he's talking about how the skeleton doesn't have any guts, right, can be a clue. They're not fully metalinguistically aware until they can tell you about it. But so the challenges that I've had sometimes in my research is to set up tasks that will scaffold that language development, will help the kids to figure out what it is they want to say. So I don't know if you remember color forms, but they're basically stickers. They're reusable stickers. And they come in all sorts of sets, with all sorts of characters on them and stuff. And that's been a tool that's been really fun for some of the younger students I've worked with, because when I want them to do something like create a syntactically ambiguous sentence, they can do things like the boy chased the girl on the bike, right? It's not clear who's on the bike, the boy or the girl. The boy chased the girl on the bike. But if you have a bike and you have a boy and a girl, then you can manipulate the stickers to put one on top of it, and you can show the whole scene without having to be much of an artist. But still, yeah, I'm sure you could probably do this online now, but I've done it with these color forms really well. And so that sort of thinking, I guess, just like how to work with kids, with really young kids that are still developing their language, was a strength of mine from an early point out. And then my own kids have absolutely inspired me. Their own, they're probably sick of my jokes, but hearing their language manipulation has been a point of inspiration for me.
I was going to ask how they feel about being examples in your book. I'm sure it's not the first time.
Yeah, so right now they're 9 and 12, so they are still thrilled. And there is even specifically a drawing of a bat holding a baseball bat that my older daughter made that made it into the book that she's super proud of. Yeah, they right now they're happy about it. When they hit teenage years, we'll see. But I also wanted to say that the fun thing about this is that I feel like it really helped me professionally just telling jokes, right, is a great way to break the ice in professional presentations or interviews. I think it helped me get my job here at PC because people were really laughing at some of the jokes I was telling. And I kept saying, like, it's not about the humor, it's about understanding the language manipulations. And then
and really, it's a fun way to learn. I mean, that's I didn't ask, but like that is probably why some of the activities and lessons that you're suggesting in the book are so successful, is because the kids have fun doing it. It's not just that it's valuable for the emerging reader, but that they enjoy it. And so they'll come back to it, and it's an engaging lesson.
Exactly. Yeah. Engagement is maybe more a better term, because I do think there are kids that don't necessarily find the jokes funny, but they approach it as a puzzle, right? This problem solving for them. And so they're super serious about it, and they're not laughing, but they're so proud of themselves when they come up with a riddle with an appropriate answer that they've written themselves. So yeah, I do think it's very engaging for everybody, for teachers and students.
If people are interested, where can they find a copy of the book? Where could they buy it?
So on the Teachers College Press website or on Amazon, the book is called Playing with Language, Improving Elementary Reading Through Metalinguistic Awareness. Amazon's probably the easiest place.
Well, it has been so great talking to you about this, Dr. Zipke. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Subscribe to the Providence College podcast in all the usual places, including iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, as well as your smart speaker. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Thanks for listening, and go Friars.